It was the kind of rain that feels heavy in your bones. Durban was drowning under it that night, and every drop drummed against the tin roof of the little church like a hammer keeping time. I could hear it even over the quiet murmurs inside. The place smelled of wet soil and burning incense, the kind of smell that makes you feel both at peace and unsettled at the same time. Up on the altar sat a small glass dove, its wing held together with a thin strip of glue so fragile it looked like it might fall apart if you breathed on it. Beside it, there was a ribbon with the word Silent Daughters stitched in neat, faded letters. Right across the knot of that ribbon was a thin red line. Most folks would have missed it, but I did not. Pastor Lindivay Dlamini stood there, straightening her collar before she began to speak. Her voice filled the air, warm and steady, the way a voice should be when you are leading people in faith. But there was something hiding in the spaces between her words, a tremble, small but alive. I had seen her before. Saturday night she sang jazz in a smoky club down by the harbour, her voice sliding over the room like honey. On Sundays, she stood here in her robes, every word a sermon. A white scar, shaped just like a crescent moon, curled along her neck. Everyone said it was from some childhood accident. But something in her eyes tonight told me she had begun to doubt that story. In the third pew sat Tandiwe. She had her hands folded neat in her lap and a stillness about her that made you think she was carved from stone. She worked as a court interpreter, and she had the kind of memory that does not let go of a single word. 6 years ago, she had been the voice between a businessman and a stranger, a talk about a killing down at the port. She never told a living soul. Last week, someone left her a note on her desk with those exact same words from back then, in bright red ink. At the church door stood Kamo, holding an umbrella that looked small in his enormous hands. His fingers were wide and thick, like they had been carved from blocks of wood. Dark grooves ran through his palms like dried riverbeds. An old man once told him those lines were not random, they were a map. A map that led to something dangerous. Kamo kept gloves on now, but under his jacket I could hear the faint whir of his old cassette recorder, always running, always listening. When the service ended, no one made much noise. Tandiwe was the first to head for the exit, but she stopped by the row of candles, her face caught in the flickering light. Pastor Lindivay walked up to her and said, "You are the interpreter, right?" Her voice was kind, but there was weariness hiding underneath. "Yes. Mostly for court cases," Tandiwe answered. Kamo stepped closer then, raising the umbrella over both women. The rain outside was so heavy it felt like walking through a wall of water. It pushed them close together. A raindrop ran down the side of Lindivay's neck, over that crescent-shaped scar. Tandiwe reached up to brush a loose strand of hair away from it. "Sorry," she said softly, but her fingers stayed there just a heartbeat too long. I saw Lindivay step back, her breath catching in her throat like she had been caught doing something she should not. I was standing by the gate when the young choir boy ran up, breath fogging in the rain. He pressed an envelope into Pastor Lindivay's hand and said it was from her father, and his face was as pale as the paper. There was a thin red scratch across the wax seal, like a blade had kissed it and backed away. Inside, I saw a neat schedule of prayer meetings, everything boxed and dated like a military plan. Tucked behind it was a single line in careful script, "Protect your honor." Under the porch light the ink seemed to shine, almost wet, and the paper smelled faintly of iron and something that reminded me of gasoline. The boy did not wait for thanks. He kept looking over his shoulder, and when I asked if everything was all right, he said the bell rope had been cut clean through earlier and then hurried off. That night the wind pushed hard at the shutters of the Ukusa Jazz Club until the hinges complained. Blue light washed over the small stage, and Pastor Lindivay sang like she was leaning her whole weight on the truth to keep from falling. Her father never approved of these nights. He called jazz the music of doubt, like doubt was a sin you could hold in your hands. But the people in that room listened with the quiet you hear before a storm, steady and deep, the way the sea listens to stones. Tandiwe sat close to the stage with a cup of rooibos cooling in her palms. Kamo stayed by the bar, touching his pocket to feel the old cassette machine humming, checking it the way a man checks his heartbeat. I kept to the back wall where I could watch the doors and the faces. During the break, a man in a grey suit drifted through the crowd like he owned the shadows. He stopped in front of Pastor Lindivay and spoke soft so it would carry only to her and to anyone who knew how to listen. He said he knew where her crescent scar came from. He said the name Camp Dawn, and the glass in her hand trembled enough to ring. For a beat his cuff slipped back and I saw a thin burn along his wrist, like he had reached into a fire and changed his mind too late. He called her by a childhood nickname I did not recognize and set a business card on the table, the corner stamped with a tiny dove whose wing looked cracked. When she looked down, he was already folding himself back into the crowd. Near the kitchen, steam and laughter rolled out through a swinging door. In that noise, a whisper slid past like a knife through cloth. In the port, it is ready. At midnight, the shipment leaves. I saw Tandiwe stop breathing for a second. It was the same voice from the conversation she had translated 6 years ago, the one that had never left her head. She wrote the words on a napkin because writing them out was the only way to keep her hand steady. The red ink bled at the edges and made a faint pink halo around every letter, like the paper itself wanted to warn her. Kamo noticed her fingers shaking and was beside her before I could take a step. He nodded toward the back door, and I followed them out into the rain. The alley smelled like wet cardboard, metal, and old oil. Water ran along the curb in a thin brown river carrying bottle caps and a torn concert flyer. Kamo pulled off one of his gloves and gave it to Tandiwe. It hung loose on her hand like a kid wearing his father's coat. "You have giant hands," she said with a nervous smile because humor is what people reach for when the ground tilts. "Neighbors say the same," Kamo answered in that even way of his. He looked down at his bare palm as if the dark lines really were a map and the rain would make the route appear. I remembered the old man who told him those marks led to trouble you could not outwalk, and I felt that memory settle in my gut like a stone. A siren rose from the direction of the port, long and lonely. Kamo clicked the cassette recorder to capture the night whether it wanted to be captured or not. Through the scratch and hiss of the tape a voice pushed its way in, "If they talk, burn the bridge." I do not scare easy, but the way he said it had a final sound to it, like a door closing on a quiet room. We looked at one another and none of us had to say a word. Durban streets were mirrors under the downpour, all neon signs bent and stretching in the puddles like they were alive. Kamo's taxi idled at the curb with the engine humming low, wipers fighting a losing battle. I opened the front passenger door and slid in to keep eyes on the road and the rear view. Tandiwe and Pastor Lindivay climbed into the back, their coats dripping, their knees touching because there was no space to spare. As the doors shut, most of the rain stayed out, but the night and whatever was coming climbed right in with us. Somewhere down the block a motorcycle engine coughed to life and then went quiet, like somebody had thought twice. Kamo put both hands on the wheel, those big fingers spread wide, and we pulled away from the curb toward the harbor lights that looked too bright for a night like this. Inside the cab the air felt warm but heavy, like a wet blanket laid over our shoulders. Kamo's big hands wrapped around the steering wheel until his knuckles went pale. I could almost hear the leather gloves creak. He flexed once and winced, like those dark lines in his palms were itching under the skin again. Pastor Lindivay did not speak. She stared out at the passing streetlights like she was counting every one of them. I could tell she still felt Tandiwe's fingers on her neck where that crescent scar sits. That small touch scared her more than the man in the grey suit ever did, and that told me plenty. Her phone buzzed on the seat between us. The word father lit up in a hard white glow. She let it ring. It rang again. And again. Then a voice message dropped in with a little chime that sounded too cheerful for a night like this. Later, when she played it, it repeated only 3 words, steady and cold, "Protect your honor." Under those words I could hear the thin bones of an old church hymn, like somebody had recorded it in a chapel with the doors shut. Kamo cut the wheel hard toward the harbor. The tires hissed through standing water. Tandiwe held onto that napkin with the pink halo of ink like it was a lifeline. "It is him," she said. "The man from the port." Kamo tightened his jaw. "Then we are running out of time," he said, and I believed him. From a narrow alley to our right a motorcycle woke up with a mean growl. The rider shot past our headlights in a black raincoat, no license plate, helmet dark as a well. For a split second the back of his coat flashed a small church emblem, a cross inside a ring. Tandiwe's eyes went to Pastor Lindivay, looking for a sign. Pastor Lindivay did not see a thing. She was busy watching raindrops race each other down the glass, like if she kept her eyes there nothing else could touch her. The harbour showed itself a minute later, all cranes and cables, iron bones reaching up into the storm. Somewhere out on the water a ship horn dragged a long low note across the night. Kamo slid us in behind a stack of shipping containers the colour of old blood. "Stay here," he said, but there was no strength in it. Men who mean it do not sound like that. Rain ticked on the roof. The old cassette recorder on Kamo's seat whispered to itself. Through the hiss I heard words crawl out of the dark: midnight, bridge, no witnesses. A heavy clang cut the sentence in half. Footsteps slapped the wet concrete. Then there was nothing but the rain and the faraway horn. The smell of diesel slid in under the doors and sat with us. Kamo came back fast, water dripping from his gloves in fat lines. "They know we are here," he said flat, "no drama, just the fact." He looked taller in that moment, like the night had stretched him. From the corner of Tandiwe's eye something moved. A figure stood on top of a container, watching us, hood pulled low so the face was only a shadow. For a breath I thought I saw another shape crouched farther down the row, mirroring the first like a bad reflection, and then the rain swallowed it. I felt the hair rise on my arms. Whoever they were, they did not look surprised to see us. They looked ready. Pastor Lindivay's phone buzzed again, loud in the quiet like a mosquito you cannot swat. This time she answered. Her father's voice came through calm and almost gentle, the kind of gentle that feels like a hand on the back of your neck. He told her to come home. He told her to leave us and leave this place. He said this was her last chance. Then he dropped his voice lower, soft but sharp as a pin. He said, "I know about your feelings." The line went dead and left a hollow sound in the car. Those words felt hotter on her skin than the rain ever could. She did not cry, but her throat worked like every swallow hurt. Somewhere in the dark to our left a motorcycle fired up again. It circled the stacks of containers once, then again, like a shark testing a boat. The rider coasted past our taxi and threw something hard and bright onto the wet concrete. It skipped once and came to rest in the light from our headlamps. Kamo stepped out and bent to pick it up. It was a small brass church emblem, the kind you see on old hymn books and lapel pins. On the back, the metal had been cut with thin scratches that curved into the shape of a crescent moon. When he turned it in his palm, the rain slid off it like oil. The brass felt so cold he hissed through his teeth. A moment later he flinched, like the metal pulsed against his skin. A bead of water ran along the edge, turned red, and I realized the emblem had nicked his thumb. The blood arced in a crescent. Pastor Lindivay stared at the emblem, breath uneven. "That is my scar," she whispered, like she was admitting it to herself as much as to us. Far inside the port a horn let out a long warning note. Floodlights banged to life one after another and turned the rain into a million silver needles. Shadows ran in every direction, tall and thin along the container walls. Metal groaned high above as a crane woke up and began to move, cables humming like a giant harp. Kamo slid the emblem into his pocket. "We need to go before that shipment leaves," he said. No one argued. Tandiwe's hand tightened on the napkin that carried the pink halo of ink. "I know that voice," she said, "steady now. I can take us to him." She did not say his name, but she did not need to. Her body already knew the route. We followed her at a trot through a narrow path between containers, steel to our left and steel to our right, rain splashing up in our faces from the puddles. Every few steps Kamo's wet gloves stamped wide prints in the mud, like a pair of bears had walked through before us. From above, something shifted on metal. A figure kept pace on the container roofs, one hooded silhouette tracking us step for step. Once I saw a flash of a second shadow that moved opposite the first, then it melted back, and I could not tell if the rain had tricked my eyes. We came up on a warehouse with one light burning inside, a square of yellow in a world of blue and grey. The side door was cracked. Through that gap we saw men hauling wooden crates onto the bed of a truck. The air smelled of wet timber and diesel fuel and old rope. Off to the side, a single man stood apart from the rest. He held a satellite phone to his ear and did not rush. He nodded once and said something I could not catch. Then he added one quiet word that did not fit a dockyard. He said, "Amen." I felt Tandiwe stiffen next to me. Her chest rose and stayed high, like she forgot how to let the breath go. It was him. The same voice that had climbed out of her memory for 6 long years. We were about to move when a shape blotted out the light behind us. A tall figure in a dark overcoat stepped from the rain as if the night itself had decided to wear a body. The hood fell back, slow and certain. It was Pastor Lindivay's father. Water ran off his hair and down the lines of his face. His eyes looked level and calm in a way that said nothing about peace. He did not shout. He did not rush. He simply stood there between us and the way we had come, like a door that had decided to be a wall. His eyes looked steady, but his jaw was set like stone. He spoke to Pastor Lindivay like a judge giving a sentence. He said he had warned her. He said she had dragged shame into the house of God and into his own home. Pastor Lindivay stopped like someone had pulled a wire tight around her chest. I could hear her pulse in the quiet between raindrops. She told him it was not about shame. She said it was about truth. Her voice shook, but it did not break. He stepped closer, rain walking down his silver hair in thin lines. He told her she had chosen sin. He told her she would watch it burn. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He lifted one hand. It was a small motion, but 10 men might as well have taken a knee. By the truck, a worker cracked a flare and held it high. Red light spilled over the yard and turned every raindrop into a spark. Shadows leaned long and mean across the containers. Inside the warehouse, men began to splash gasoline over the crates. The smell punched straight through the storm and sat sharp in the back of my throat. From deep in the stack came a dull thudding. It was quiet at first, then frantic. Somebody was inside one of those boxes. Kamo did not hesitate. He tore off his gloves and the dark lines in his palms caught the red glow like wet ink. He grabbed the steel lock on the side door. It groaned once and folded in his hand like it had been made of cheap tin. The man with the flare dropped it when the heat licked his wrist. The fire kissed the gasoline and jumped. Flames ran like foxes along the floor. A muffled scream cut the night in two. The fire took hold faster than I thought possible. Gas had soaked the wood clear through. Smoke crawled out low, even under the door, and then climbed, thick and grey. The heat hit our faces like we had opened an oven. Tandiwe went in first. Her shoe slid on the wet concrete and she caught herself on a stack of rope. I went right behind her and covered my mouth with my sleeve. We followed the pounding like you follow a heartbeat. It led us to a crate the size of a coffin stood on its side. Her fingers fought for purchase and tore at the nails. Blood beaded along the edges of her cuticles and smudged the wood dark. "Back," Kamo said, and I pulled her away. He set his hands where the boards crossed. For a breath he looked at his palms like he was reading them. Then he drove forward with his weight. The board screamed and split. Outside, Pastor Lindivay's father watched from the rain. Smoke rolled past him and he did not blink. "You cannot save her from herself," he said, "not to us so much as to the wind." A second man stepped up beside him holding another flare, and I noticed a small brass emblem pinned under the lapel of the father's coat. It matched the one in Kamo's pocket. The crate burst open. A young woman stumbled out and almost fell into my arms. She coughed hard enough to fold over. Her hair was damp and stuck to her cheeks. Her eyes found Pastor Lindivay and held. Something in the air changed in that instant. It felt like a door opening in a dark room. The young woman reached out with a trembling hand. Pastor Lindivay took it without looking away. You could feel the current run between them. Not loud. Not flashy. Just true. Her father saw the whole exchange. The red light burned hot in his eyes. His voice dropped low and shook. He asked if this was the sin she chose. He asked if this was the reason she had turned her back on him. I stepped between them without thinking. He pricked the skin on my neck. Behind us the fire cracked a row of empty pallets and threw sparks to the rafters. Somewhere above, a metal beam popped like a rifle shot. Men at the truck began to shout over one another. The crane cables groaned and a hook swung, carving a bright arc through the smoke. Kamo slid the young woman toward the open door and shoved the crate aside with one arm. He grabbed a fire extinguisher off the wall and blew a white cloud at the flames to cut us a path. It held for half a second, then the gasoline found new breath. We staggered back out into the rain, coughing hard, skin stinging, eyes watering, lungs angry. Pastor Lindivay stood with the young woman's hand in hers. I saw that crescent scar on her neck shine in the red light like a brand and then fade as a gust of rain washed over it. Her father lifted his chin and, for the first time, I heard a tremble in him. He glanced at the flare in the second man's fist like he needed courage from it. He started to speak a line from a hymn, but the words bent on the way out. Behind him, at the very edge of the yard, the rider on the motorcycle eased closer. The headlamp was off. Only the rain gave his outline away. He had a chain looped around his shoulder. I did not like the way his helmet turned, slow and patient, like he was counting our number. Kamo put his gloves back on, fingers flexing. The seams stretched and I thought they would split. He looked from the father to the men at the truck to the crane hook. He was drawing lines no one else could see. He was reading that map again, only this time it was not on his hands. It was all around us. Yes, Pastor Lindivay said. Her voice did not shake this time. I love her. The fire cracked, the rain hissed, and a strange quiet slid over us like a blanket. For the length of a heartbeat nobody moved. I could feel my own breath slow down just to listen to what would happen next. Her father slid a hand into his coat. Kamo stepped in front of Pastor Lindivay and the rescued woman without waiting for a word from anyone. The dark lines in his bare palms gleamed like black rivers under the red flare light. He told the old man he would have to go through him first. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The old man's hand came out holding a simple metal lighter. He spun the wheel. A small flame jumped and danced in the wind like it enjoyed the weather. The bridge will burn, he said in a low voice that carried through the rain better than any shout. Then he threw the lighter toward a second row of crates that none of us had noticed in the smoke. Later I would learn those crates were stacked with dry rope and resin. The lighter tumbled end over end, flame stuttering but alive. It struck wood with a hollow knock that sounded too clean. In a single breath the fire ran straight up the sides of those boxes and swallowed every shadow in its way. Heat rolled off them in a wave that felt like it pushed the rain back into the sky. Kamo seized Pastor Lindivay by the arm and pulled. We need to move right now, he said, and there was no room for argument in his tone. Tandiwe dragged the rescued woman toward the open door, both of them coughing and stumbling through the smoke. I pressed a wet handkerchief over my mouth and kept my eyes on the ceiling for falling sparks. The port fell into a wild kind of rhythm. Alarms wailed through the storm like they were trying to outsing the thunder. Men shouted orders that broke apart in the wind and did not reach the people who needed to hear them. Somewhere metal twisted against itself and groaned, and I knew the loading dock bridge had started to give. A cable snapped with a rifle crack sound that made every head turn. Pastor Lindivay turned back for one last look at her father. Through the boil of smoke he looked like a ghost borrowed from a sad story. Come with us, she called, and her voice had weight in it again. He did not answer. The rain cut paths down his face that looked like tears, but his eyes were hard as nails and colder than the night. This bridge is not only wood and steel, he said. It is everything you have built on lies. He stepped backward toward the wall of heat, and I saw the air around him ripple like the man was standing inside a mirage. I took a step his way, and the heat slapped me back like an open hand. Kamo's huge hand settled on Pastor Lindivay's shoulder and eased her around. He has made his choice, Kamo said, voice down low and steady. Somewhere in the bones of the dock another beam complained. From the sound of it I guessed we had seconds before the whole thing gave up. We ran. The air had a taste of metal and ash, like chewing on a rusted nail. My lungs burned hot and then burned cold as the rain hit the back of my throat. Behind us the bridge let out one long scream of ripping bolts that felt like it pulled something from my chest on its way out. Then it dropped. The crash rolled across the harbor and came back as a second wave, bouncing off the warehouses and the ship hulls like it did not know where to stop. Red firelight painted the black water and threw moving color across our faces. Somewhere out in the dark the motorcycle engine roared once like a warning and then slipped away as if it had found the silence it wanted. On the pier the rescued woman did not let go of Pastor Lindivay's hand. Her name was Nia, and now that she was out of the smoke she could stand on her own legs, but she chose not to. Tandiwe stood tight at their side, eyes cutting between the flames and the lanes of shadow where trouble usually waits. Kamo tugged his gloves back on and covered the map that ran in his skin as if he could put the whole night back in a box. Far across town a set of church bells counted out 12. Midnight sounded clean through the mess and held there like a straight line. For the first time that night Pastor Lindivay spoke with no weight squatting on her voice. "This is where it begins," she said. I believed her because something in the air shifted when she said it, like the story decided to keep going whether any of us were ready or not. Near the edge of the pier a small glass dove lay on the wet boards. Its cracked wing had come loose at last and rested inches from the water, bright as a tooth in the lightning. None of us saw it then. We were too busy counting breaths and exits. Later I would remember the way the tiny wing rocked toward the harbor and think about what it means to let a broken piece go. Morning came heavy and pale, with fog thick enough to feel with your hands. The busted bridge stuck up from the water like black bones trying to climb back to shore. Police boats drifted through the wreckage, hooks scraping, ropes slapping, men calling to one another in careful voices. Every so often a plank would bob up, roll once, and then disappear again. Pastor Lindivay stood at the end of the pier with her coat pulled close, shoulders square like she was holding up the weather by herself. Nia leaned against her hip, quiet and steady, the way a person leans when they intend to stay. Tandiwe spoke to an officer in a voice no louder than it needed to be and slipped a folded napkin into her pocket when no one was watching. The pink halo of ink showed for an instant and was gone. Kamo sat on a crate with his gloves off and his elbows on his knees, staring into his hands like a man reading a map before a long drive. The dark lines had deepened overnight. They looked sharper, like someone had cut them fresh with a careful blade. A curve I had not noticed before caught the early light and drew his eye. He froze. It was not a simple map after all. It was a coastline. The shape under his skin matched the harbor in front of us, and the place where we stood was marked with a neat little X. I watched the tide sneak up between the piles and, for a second, I would have sworn that X brightened when a wave touched the pier. Behind us a single church bell rang once. The note hung in the fog longer than it should have, too clean, too deliberate. It was not Sunday. It was not any kind of service hour. I remember the choir boy saying the bell rope had been cut the night before, and that set my teeth on edge. Pastor Lindivay turned toward the sound. Out of the mist a tall figure walked along the pier in a black coat that dripped at the edges. My breath hitched and then climbed out as a cold cloud. It was her father. He was wet all through, and the hems of his coat were scorched where the fire had licked them, but the man was alive and moving like his feet knew exactly where to land. He stopped at a distance where the fog blurred his face but not his intent. "I built one bridge," he said, voice riding the water like a flat stone. "I can burn another." Something about the way he said it made the morning feel darker than the night had been. Before any of us could find a word that would matter, he turned and vanished back into the grey like a door closing itself. His steps made almost no sound. Only the bell rope swung once more above the chapel and then went still. Kamo closed his hands over the lines in his skin until the knuckles went white. Tandiwe met his eyes and did not look away. "This is not finished," she said. Her voice was not angry. It was sure. The fog thickened around the pier, rolling in low and close. Somewhere inside that soft wall of grey a motorcycle engine started with a slow, patient growl. The sound did not come closer. It did not move away. It just waited, like a promise that had decided to become a threat.